Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, Managing Partner Craig Jeffery of Strategic Treasurer shares some of the most frequently asked questions by finance and Treasury professionals. Topics of discussion center around centralized connectivity, including payments, Treasury Aggregators, and the importance of these services. Listen in as he continues with FAQs in Treasury with Round 4. Today, we're excited to continue our discussion on some of the most frequently asked questions by Treasury and finance professionals with Round 4 of FAQs. We'll discuss some key elements of centralized connectivity for Treasury and accounts payable. What is a payment hub? What is a payment factory? A Treasury aggregator is what? Why do Treasury and payment professionals need to know about these services? These FAQs center on Treasury aggregation. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Hey, good morning.
What is centralized connectivity? The intro has many terms laid out. Can you start by describing centralized connectivity, what it means, and why that is important for an increasing number of firms?
Yeah, the core of what you're saying is why should people keep listening if we've talked about terms and they don't necessarily resonate with what you're doing? So centralized connectivity is the communication hub or cloud, if you will, of the communication that a treasury group or a payables group needs to manage inbound information from a variety of sources, but particularly from banks, as well as outbound communication to originate payments of a variety of sources across the globe. So it is a centralized in terms of a single area, and the connectivity, it establishes all those connections.
So what does this mean for an organization, and why is it important?
It's important. The concept, I may have mentioned something like this before on another podcast, but the concept of, centralized connectivity or Treasury aggregators is, why do you have one phone with multiple numbers on it? You don't have different phones for different people. You want the communication organized and streamlined. You might talk to different people. Having somebody who can help translate may help if you're speaking in 10 different languages. So the issue of this hub mentality or a centralized connectivity means I can connect to different places with a single method, and it can handle all of the different formats or languages that exist, just like you'd have one phone. We'd say it's crazy to have 10 phones on your desk or 20 phones or 30 phones. It doesn't make sense. And that's important, from your concept of why it's important for an increasing number of firms is complexity has increased, and how do we simplify that complexity? You don't simplify it by saying we have more phones on our desk to talk to more people. We have a phone that can do more things. It can call different numbers. It can also handle different formats. It also provides security. And so this is more important because more people are dealing with more banks for payments. They connect to more banks globally for information reporting. And so as you have more banks, more payment types, more accounts, more activity, that has to be simplified. And the way that has to be simplified is with centralized connectivity in a broader term. And I know we have some other terms we need to talk about.
Yes, so let's dive into some of the terms. I'll list what you have mentioned and perhaps you could describe them. What is a payment hub?
Yeah, payment hub is a system. That's not universally understood to be a system, but a payment hub is a system that will take different formats of information, requests for payments, maybe from several AP systems, maybe from an ERP or a general ledger system, or an overall accounting system that creates payment files. It could come from Treasury, it could come from a Treasury system, and it takes that information, those requests for payments, puts them into the platform, formats them, checks them, validates them, and then, depending on how things are set up, allows different reviews or approvals within the organization, and then takes to delivering those payments through the right channel to the right destination. So it could be ACHs are going to the U.S., other types of payments are going through BACs in the U.K., SEPA payments might be delivered through SWIFT to their bank in Europe, et cetera. So it takes all of the different source requests and organizes them, provides additional enriched services and controls, and then takes care of delivering those messages, receiving confirmations back about them.
How long does that normally take?
The process of moving it. Usually they're very fast processes that will take and transform data and run the checks. If there's no errors, when we talk about a process without defects, it can go quite rapidly. But it oftentimes mirrors what the organizational flow is for those payments. So AP might have a batch process where it gathers together in a payment request a set of records, or here's the payment file, the proposed payment file. Maybe it's approved, and then it's sent in, and that's expected to be delivered, by 10 at night or by a certain cutoff time to hit the next day cycle. So those can take whatever time is necessary to make sure that all the approvals are done and that it settles according to the planned settlement date where value transfer occurs. So sometimes it's batch, and other times it needs to be much more rapid. It could be wire payments are going out this way, and they need to occur within an hour, within 30 minutes, 15 minutes, or sooner, or some of the other faster payment initiatives that exist. So it can be very quick, or it can take a little longer, especially if there's gating items or time frame requirements are different.
Excellent. What is a payment factory?
Payment hub and payment factory are sometimes used by certain people as interchangeable. We don't use them that way, and we've put in our Treasury Aggregator analyst report, we've laid out the definitions, which are the most commonly used, but it's by no means universally used. So a payment factory is the group, oftentimes a shared service center, also called a center of excellence, that will handle all of the payments. So they're the payment factory making payments. And so this tends to be a centralized area handling that. Now, a payment factory is the people and staff. It can also include the technology that goes along with it. And so that becomes the broader definition of a payment factory. Usually this does not include treasury payments. It includes all of the organizational payments, whether from an administrative system, like from an insurance company, whether from AP or any other type of payment system that exists, usually from multiple areas around the world. And so it's an efficiency play, more focused on the people than on the technology, but it does oftentimes include a technology component. So it's a factory that makes payments.
Can you provide a little bit more detail on data aggregation, consolidated reporting information?
Yeah, so if you listen to the other responses I gave to the frequently asked questions or frequently confusing questions or terms, that was the outbound side. We were talking about payments and having a way of communicating the payment messages or instructions for making payments, settling these types of transfers. So data aggregation, information aggregation, or consolidation reporting, however people refer to it, that's the process of saying, I need to get information organized and into a back-end system that I have. A back-end system being a treasury management system. Could be your ERP, could be a reconciliation platform. So how do I get that together? When you have a single bank and a single account or a couple accounts, if I get a feed somehow and I want to integrate that, that's one level of complexity. But when you want to connect to a lot of banks, maybe in a single country or maybe in multiple countries, you need to get that information into the system. And so instead of having a range of portals that people are looking at, downloading it to an Excel file, uploading it into the accounting platform or into a TMS, all of that information needs to be gathered and then loaded into the system. And so aggregation could be a service where your bank may offer a service where they aggregate the data from 5 or 6 banks. There's some different terms for it, but those banks can take statement information, both transaction and summary information, into their system and then give you through their feed, the 5 or 6 banks. All of that information can be reported through a single feed. So they're acting as the the aggregator of that particular information. By the same token, there are dedicated Treasury aggregators that will take and aggregate inbound statement information to do the same thing. And that's aggregation on the inbound side.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about Treasury Aggregator? What exactly is that?
So Treasury Aggregator is a broader term that we use that would include both inbound and outbound aggregation of information. So on the inbound side, that would be the data aggregator or information aggregator, where it's taking different types of statements, whatever format they're in, older formats like the MT940 or the BAI format, or newer formats, some of the XML CAMT messages, CAMT message formats coming in. So it would aggregate the inbound information, and it would also aggregate outbound information. So what we mean by that is aggregating the outbound information is what we refer to as the payment hub. So you can have a payment hub that only handles the outbound transmission, reformatting, transformation, control of payment information as a payment hub. A Treasury aggregator will handle both the inbound information and the outbound payment side. So by our definition of the term Treasury aggregator, it includes both pieces. It necessarily includes both pieces, or it's either a data aggregator or it's a payment hub.
Why do Treasury and payment professionals need to know about these types of services?
I thought you were going to ask me questions thinking that I had confused you even more with my definitions there, but why do they need to know about that? Or, and yeah, anybody still listening at this, since we're talking conceptually about aggregating data, I think the concept of we're doing business in more countries with more banking partners, the complexity increases across levels of format, and there's a lot of changes in formats that exist for payments and for information reporting. If we want to leverage enriched formats for payments, we may not be able to do that if we're having to constantly change our underlying systems that generate payments. And we might have a lot of underlying systems. Many organizations, bigger organizations, acquire other firms. They might have 5, 6, 10, 20 different systems generating payments. If you're going to take advantage of a new format and you have 5 systems, now you have to change 5 underlying systems, perhaps in a very significant way. And now instead of doing that on an individual basis to change all 5 systems to support a new format, and then let's say you move a bank later on, now you have to change all those formats and connection methods 5 separate times. Having an aggregator usually alleviates a significant portion of that because that function can handle reformatting, making sure that the new format, a better format, a faster format, a more enriched format, an XML-based format can be used. And so it simplifies all of those connections. It's somebody who it's like a person who can dial a bunch of different phone numbers and also handle a bunch of different languages for you. You want them communicating for you. If you're talking, French, German, Japanese, etc., you can list a whole range of languages. If you had someone who could do all of that, they would be a very effective communicator if that's the situation you have. And that's why it really matters on the payment side. The payment side matters because more organizations are more global, dealing in multiple countries with multiple institutions. And on the flip side, when you say, why does it matter getting that information in the way, through an aggregator? If you're connecting to a single bank, you might just need a portal to see what's coming in from that bank. You start dealing with a couple more, you need that information reported, and a host-to-host connection can work fine. I'm connecting to 2 banks or 3 banks. But you expand that to, 5 banks, 10 banks in multiple formats. Now you are setting up an individual pipe. You're setting up the string between people with cups on the end for your phone conversation, as opposed to having those 10 phone numbers programmed into your phone so you can speak to those different areas. Now, it's hard to speak on anything but a single-threaded line, but this phone system analogy is, now that person and that phone can connect to 10 different banks at once, handle the different languages or formats, pull that in, do error checking, make sure it's clean or fix issues if they arise, and that information can come in. It's smart plumbing for the organization. And why do you need smart plumbing? Well, if you have, think about the cables and plumbing that come into your house. You've got something for data, whether it's cable or, some other, fiber coming into your home for, internet service. You might have water coming in and some other, connection. You need that throughout your house. Having all those connected separately is very inefficient. But once it comes in, you want it distributed and managed. So this is essentially the plumbing. It's very smart plumbing for data, for water, whatever else you need to come into your house.
Is it more important now than in the past?
Depends on the company, and yes. So it depends on the company. It may not. It's just useful to know if you're a smaller company or a simple company that's connecting to a single provider. This may not be relevant to you. Not everyone needs a smartphone, though a lot of people have it. But it's increasingly relevant because more organizations are more global. They have more bank relationships. They tend to expand. So as you move up the complexity scale, which is not always directly related to size of an organization. So this increase in complexity means we need ways to simplify it, to simplify the languages, the formats, and connecting the plumbing. Some people walk around, you see them with two phones. Well, there's a reason for two phones. One's for work and one's for business. But why are people walking around with 4 phones or 20 phones? You would not say that makes sense. You would say they're crazy for carrying 20 phones around. And we do that. And part of that, Meredith, is that if you grow in complexity with the company, you have one bank, you add another bank, you establish a host-to-host connection. Then, a year later, you add a third bank, and then you have payments coming out of the AP system, and there's another connection there, and then you have to connect into, Switzerland, and then you're connecting into Europe or Asia, and you keep adding connections one by one. You eventually make it so that you have every decision it was easier to add another connection. It was easier to put another phone on my desk. And that doesn't seem wild when you have 2 phones on your desk. But when you have 10 or 15, you say, this is not the right way to do it. And it starts there because each incremental decision might be, well, it's easier to establish this host-to-host connection. It's easier to do it on our own. And then it gets out of control at some point. And so it has to be rationalized. Why is it important now? I think that was your question, right? Why is it important now? Because of increased complexity and because there are so many changes taking place with formats that organizations can take advantage of. XML versus some of the older formats. They're more flexible. More information can be sent on them. I'll give an example of that. And there's been some other podcasts where we did talk into some data. So a little bit of this is a repeat. What were we talking about? We were talking about it.
You need some more Mountain Dew.
I need some more Diet Dr. Pepper or whatever to keep the stuff.
We were talking about, why is it more important now than in the past? And you were talking about basically how it's positively impacting and how it's useful for companies now because they're global. They have more than one bank. And I'd be interested also, it might be good for you to share, does it save companies money? It streamlines their communications, it's more time efficient. How does it optimize their resources, that type?
Yeah, to your question about how does it optimize resources, streamline things, or save money, it can. And I think when you look at it comprehensively, what the costs are, that's where you have to make a decision. The more complexity you have, the more this is efficient for your organization, the more it allows you to be scalable. So some of those might be strategic in nature, and some of those might be very, return on investment.
So when a company is growing, when should they kind of stop and be like, hey, we may need to take a look at something like this?
I think people should be looking and saying, what are my options and when might that make sense? Part of that, when that might make sense, could be in the future, but they should look at it ahead of time, not say, you might use a rule of thumb, hey, if I'm connecting to 5, 6 or more banks for information reporting and, more than 2 or 3 banks for payments, I definitely need to look at Treasury Aggregators or payment hubs or data consolidators. Those are some ground rules where you might think that oftentimes that becomes a tipping point for when it makes sense, depending on the situation. But beyond that, people should be aware of where they are and what's changing. If you're changing rapidly, don't wait till, okay, when I hit 10, I'm going to change over, but I built 7, 8, 9, 10 connections. Now I'm going to have to unhook those 10 and connect, through an aggregator or data consolidator, because now I've hit that milestone. If you're going to be hitting it soon, if you're going to reach an area where it makes sense, put all your new development into the new method of connecting that's relevant for that size and complexity. And then you can convert the older items, the older connection methods, in a more systematic and reasoned manner, not with a panic, not with an issue. The other factor on that is why people look at it, particularly with regard to payments. And this is where those that are listening just for a quick answer on facts may want to just tune out or go to the end, the last couple of minutes with the recap, because I'm going to talk a little bit about fraud here. Everyone knows fraud is created by criminals now who are persistent, they're automated, they're sophisticated, they're both general and targeted, they're leveraging a lot of this, they're patient as well, and they can target organizations. What that has meant initially has been a real growth and success rate, with this CEO fraud, business email compromise, where someone's pretending to be someone else and convinces you to send payments. That continues to be the case, and there is a real aspect of the processes around a Treasury Aggregator, a payment hub, can help segregate duties. It can also enforce the policies and processes. And finally, it also helps with the principle of least privilege, limiting access and information to those that need it. And so it helps in that regard. More important than that, I think, as we go forward, as you look at fraud, where they're going, they continue to look and push and try to move off of just convincing people to make payments because that's easier. But they're also trying to be, as they're persistent, they're automated, gaining insight. They're surveilling companies, they're inside systems, seeing what goes on, and they want to be able to change information on payment instructions, whether it's through email, gain access to underlying systems, gain access to payment files. And because that is a new era where you can get much more money out that way than you might be able to from business email compromise, and because they're targeting that and they're more sophisticated, this is the ground where they are making progress on it. There will be much more progress on this. And in 5 years, we will be talking about, you need a payment hub, you need a Treasury Aggregator, you need a controlled end-to-end process where nothing can be intercepted, nothing can be altered or changed. And we need to make sure we're exhibiting principles of least privilege, segregation of duties in a more mature way than we have been so far. So this will become much more important. It won't become an option and a nice to have and helping us to simplify things. It will become a requirement to protect the entire payment process at a level that most companies aren't doing now. Now, there are certainly more and more companies who are taking a much more mature view and approach, robust, strengthened approach to address these. But I'm not saying this because it's just fun to talk about what's going to go on, because when we look at the threat of fraud and the sophistication, the resources they have, and the yield that they've been getting, this other area will grow and it will dwarf what's happening with business email compromise. And whether that's going to dwarf it in 2 or 3 years, I don't know. 7 to 10 years, yes. I mean, we're just seeing that if we don't take steps to prevent it across the board, there's going to be more of this going on. It won't just be fooling or spoofing people. It will be changing and altering files in a way that doesn't lead to healthy career or financial consequences for individuals or their organization.
It's very interesting. We should have a FAQs 5 just on that topic. Any final thoughts?
A final thought I have on this is that we have provided some definitions here. I hope the listeners didn't get distracted, because if you've thought a payment factory is really a payment hub or a payment hub is whatever, in your definition, don't worry. I described how we think it. it is and what we think is the most common usage of Payment Hub, Payment Factory, and Treasury Aggregator. So don't get sidetracked by your definition may be different than what ours is, but understanding that there are differences, whether it's a system that helps you aggregate payments and manage that process effectively, whether it's a group that handles payments, that group may also include the technology such as a Payment Hub, or whether you have the definition of a Treasury Aggregator handling both inbound and outbound information. As long as you have that in your head, you can use whatever terms you want. Just make sure that everyone's using the consistent terms and understand the endpoint. The endpoint is efficiency, scalability, effectiveness, and protection against fraud, criminal behavior, and other types of events that can threaten your organization, including compliance and sanctions screening, filtering, just helping your organization be better positioned across all those different domains or areas of emphasis.
Thanks, Craig. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I look forward to continuing the FAQs series. For our listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Treasury Update podcast. If you would like to listen to the first 3 rounds of FAQs in Treasury, visit us at strategictreasurer.com/podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Meredith.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.